Not all screams in a delivery room come from physical pain. Sometimes, what really tears a woman apart inside is not the contraction, it's the truth. This story, which you are about to hear, is not just about birth. It's about the end of an illusion, the collapse of trust, and, at the same time, the most unexpected choice a woman could make with a baby in her arms and her heart in pieces. It sounds like a soap opera story, but it's real, and because of that, it hurts even more. Tedyasti all started with what seemed like a peaceful pregnancy, a young, promising couple, the kind that makes people sigh on social media. She, a sweet, dedicated woman, passionate about the idea of starting a family. He, the man she chose to love, to build a life with, to dream about together. At first glance, they seem to be living that perfect script that so many dream of. But behind the smiles and the black and white photos of the growing belly, something much darker was brewing. And like all bitter truths, this one would also come to light at the least expected moment. The protagonist of this story, who we will get to know in her own words in the next part, is one of those women who holds the world in her arms and still wonders if she is doing enough. From the beginning of her pregnancy, she began to feel a certain distance from her husband. Small absences, changes in his gaze, a coldness disguised as tiredness. But like many women in love and pregnant, she chose to trust. She chose to love beyond doubt. She pretended not to hear the whispers of her intuition. After all, who wants to believe that they are being betrayed when they are carrying inside them a child of the man they love? But the universe has its own way of giving birth to the truth, and sometimes that truth comes stained with blood, tears, and with the crying of a baby as a soundtrack. She didn't know that, in that hospital, surrounded by nurses, lights, and scalpels, she would not only give birth to a child, but also put an end to a lie that was eating her away in silence. What happened in that delivery room was not just a birth. It was a revelation. And the most unbelievable thing, in the midst of the most intense pain, at the most vulnerable moment, she made a decision that many people would consider impossible. She forgave. And it wasn't after. It was even before cutting the umbilical cord. You might be wondering, how does someone have the strength to do this? What exactly happened? What kind of betrayal can be revealed during childbirth? And what would you do in that same situation? That's what you're about to discover, hearing it straight from her mouth. Get ready to dive into a story of betrayal, pain, but also of choices that defy common understanding. A story that will shake your values, your judgments, and perhaps even the way you view forgiveness. And before I continue, I want to ask you, if it were you there in bed, in the midst of labor pains, with a betrayal blowing up in your face, would you be able to forgive? Comment below, because this story is real, it's human, and it may be more common than you think. If this story has touched you in any way, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. What follows will leave an impression on you, and maybe, change something inside you.
Hello, my name is Larissa. And to this day, I wonder how I managed to smile in those maternity photos. You know those images you see on social media? The exhausted but radiant mother, the father holding the baby with tears in his eyes as if the world had stopped to watch that moment. Well, I had that too. Or rather, I pretended I had it. I never imagined that the most important day of my life would also become the most devastating, and worse, that everything would be revealed. There, between one contraction and another, between the cold touch of the scalpel and the warmth of my baby on my chest. But before we get to that moment, let me tell you how it all began, and how I ignored the signs that now seem to be screaming. When Lucas and I found out we were pregnant, I thought we were living a miracle. We had gone through some difficulties to get pregnant. It wasn't as quick as in the movies. There was crying, there were tests, there was insecurity. And when the test came back positive, he cried. I cried. We hugged each other for minutes that seemed like forever. And there, in that hug, I swore to myself that we would be a happy family. In the first few months, he was a prince. He went with me to every ultrasound, held my hand during the exams, prepared surprises at home. He said I was even more beautiful when I was pregnant, and I believed every word. But it was there, in the 5th month, that something began to change. Small, almost imperceptible, but it changed. He started coming home later. He claimed to have more meetings. He started using his phone less around me. He stopped commenting on the posts I made about the pregnancy. And when I talked about the layette, the nursery, the name, he smiled with that distant look, as if he was there, but not really. I felt it. A woman feels it. But a pregnant woman, in love, she chooses not to see it. And I chose not to see it. I chose to justify it. He's stressed with work. It's the fear of being a father, it'll pass. But it didn't. And every night that he came home and avoided my touch, my smell, my belly, I died a little inside. I started having bad dreams. I dreamed about him with another woman. I dreamed that my baby was born and he wasn't there. And I woke up sweating, crying, but embarrassed to tell anyone, as if it were my fault, as if I was being ungrateful for suspecting the father of my child until the last month arrived. And then the distance turned into coldness. He hardly spoke to me. He slept on his side. And me? I stayed there, hugging my belly, trying to talk to the baby, praying that he wouldn't feel my pain, that he wouldn't absorb that cutting silence. I asked God, Lord, give me strength, give me peace, help me not to go crazy. And then the day arrived. My water broke. The pain started. And even with everything I was feeling, I called him. I wanted him to be there. I wanted to believe that his love still existed, even if it was just for that moment. He arrived at the hospital, cold. He was looking at his cell phone the whole time, and deep in my eyes, I knew something was going to happen, something much bigger than the pains of labor, and it happened. But that, I'll tell you in the next part. Now, I just want to ask you one thing. Have you ever had to pretend to be strong when, inside, you were broken? Have you ever felt that love turned into an absence without explanation? Comment here, tell me. Because this story is more common than it seems. And if this has touched you in some way, leave a like, share it with someone and subscribe to the channel. I need you to be with me until the end of this story. I remember the smell of the hospital, that mixture of alcohol, anxiety, and a strange emptiness in the chest. The contractions came like waves, and I held on to the edge of the bed, trying to breathe, trying to concentrate, trying to ignore that my son's father was right there. But at the same time, so far away from me. Lucas was in the corner of the room, standing, playing with his phone. He didn't hold my hand once. He didn't look me in the eye. The nurse came in to check the baby's heartbeat and asked me if he was nervous or if it was just his way. I smiled shyly. Because how was I going to explain this? How was I going to tell him that he was acting like he was in a regular waiting room? That he seemed uncomfortable being there? I tried to focus on the baby, on the birth, on the moment that was supposed to be ours, but my heart was restless. And then, in the midst of the chaos of pain and emotion, the truth came. Naked, raw, and unbearable. The doctor came in to give me the news that an emergency C-section would be necessary. The baby's cord was wrapped around it. I was taken to the operating room within minutes. I was shaking, with fear, with pain, and with something else that I couldn't name yet. When I was already lying on the stretcher, anesthetized from the waist down, about to meet my son, I heard something. Low, but audible, a nurse whispered to another, "It's him. The father is the one out there. The one who was on duty yesterday with Thais. Did you see what happened?" I saw, and now it's here as if nothing. Courage, right? At that moment, my heart started racing. The name Thais hit me like a knife. She was a co-worker of his. She had already appeared a few times on his social media at company events. I asked him 1,000 times who she was. He always said she was married, that she was almost like a sister. I swallowed it. I swallowed it until it got stuck. And there, lying there, anesthetized, about to hear my son's first cry, I knew. No proof, no screenshots, but I knew. The way the nurse spoke, the embarrassment on her face when she realized I was listening. The silence, broken only by the metallic noise of the surgical instruments. And my heart beating so loudly, it seemed to echo off the walls. At that moment, I looked at the white ceiling, and I cried. I cried as if I was burying all my dreams, and at the same time, something inside me said, "Not now. Later you will fall apart. Now he needs you. Your son will arrive." And he arrived. The most beautiful cry in the world. The sound that should have filled my heart, but that mixed joy with deep mourning. Because as I looked at that defenseless, perfect little being, I thought, you arrived in a world where your father betrayed your mother while you were still in the womb. What irony, my son. You were born on the day that truth was born along with you. Lucas entered the room with the camera in his hand. "Look at him there, our prince," he said, smiling. I didn't answer. I just asked him to hold the baby so he could cut the cord. And at that moment, I forgave. Not for him, but for myself, for that baby, for everything that was yet to come, because carrying hatred there at that moment would be the first hurt my son would feel, even without knowing it. I cut the cord with trembling hands. I didn't cry on the outside, but on the inside. I died, and was reborn another. Have you ever experienced a time when everything fell apart, and yet you still had to keep your head up? Have you ever had to forgive at the exact moment you were destroyed? Tell me in the comments. I need to know that I'm not the only one. And if this story touched you, help me keep telling it. Leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe. The next part will hurt even more, but you need to hear it. That night, even though I couldn't close my eyes, I forced myself not to text, not to call, not to question. I just lay down on the bed with my hand on my belly and cried, softly, as if I didn't want the baby to hear the sound of my pain. It's strange how we feel our heart breaking, as if it was something physical, an internal slap that we never forget. The doubt still tortured me. Was it true, or was it envy from someone wanting to destroy my home? But deep down, I already knew. A pregnant woman's intuition is stronger than any evidence. My body was already tired and swollen, but my mind was at war. And worse, I was afraid of what this could do to my baby. The next day, he came home as if nothing had happened. He kissed me on the cheek and asked if I wanted him to pick up something. I wanted to scream, I wanted to push him against the wall and ask, "How many people have you cheated on me with? Since when?" But I didn't do any of that. I just said that I needed space, that my body was tired and my soul even more so. He tried to hug me and I backed away. I saw discomfort in his eyes. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was fear that I had found out, but he didn't say anything. Silence. Silence is cruel. And at that moment, his silence screamed everything he wanted to hide. I started noticing little details, deleted messages, calls that were rejected in front of me, changes in his behavior. He no longer looked me in the eye. He slept facing the other side of the bed. And I, even with a child growing inside me, felt invisible. No one deserves this. No woman should go through this at such a sacred moment in her life. I had every reason to explode, but my soul just wanted peace. I wanted to understand why. What was missing in me? Where did I go wrong? When I was 8.5 months pregnant, I went to the prenatal appointment alone. He said he had a meeting at work. That was a lie. On the way back, I decided to stop by his sister's house, who had always been my friend. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe just a sincere look, a warning, anything to prepare me for what I was feeling was coming. And she, without meaning to, confirmed everything. She talked about a mess he had gotten himself into months ago, a new girl who had appeared along the way. And then she stopped talking, as if she had realized she was telling too much. But it was too late. My heart understood. It was real. My husband cheated on me while I was carrying his child. That night I broke down. I cried like I had never cried before. I screamed without sound. I prayed for strength. And I made a promise. My son will not be born in the midst of this pain. I will protect him until the end, even if it costs me my sanity. I will not allow pain to stain the most important day of our lives. But inside me, a new feeling began to grow. It wasn't anger, it was something else. Something I still didn't know how to name. If this story has moved you so far, tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you forgive before demanding the truth? Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. There is still a lot to happen, and what comes next will surprise you even more. I never imagined that life could take me to a place so dark and yet so full of light. Holding my son in my arms was the sweetest and most bittersweet thing I have ever experienced. In that moment, When I heard his first cry, I felt a mixture of deep love and a pain that seemed to rip my heart out. The doctor had just revealed that the baby wasn't his. My husband, the man I had planned my entire life with, was not the father of this child. I couldn't believe it. The betrayal, which had previously been just a harrowing suspicion, had become a harsh, brutal, raw reality right there in that hospital room. It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. My body was shaking, my mind was racing, and all I wanted to do was run away from this place, this moment, this life I thought I knew. But the baby was there, defenseless, and I was the only one who could protect him. I remember looking at him, that tiny little face, and thinking, this person is not to blame for anything. At that moment, anger and sadness mixed with an immense tenderness that I did not expect to feel. It was the beginning of an internal struggle that I could never imagine facing. My husband stood silently, his eyes downcast, trying to find words that didn't exist. I wanted to scream, to accuse, to demand answers. But instead, I felt a strange calm come over me. A calm that told me I had to be bigger than this pain, bigger than the betrayal. Before the umbilical cord was cut, I made a decision that no one expected. With a trembling voice, I looked at him and said, I forgive you. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Not because he deserved it, but because I didn't want to carry that hatred for the rest of my life. This forgiveness did not erase the wound, nor the lie, nor the humiliation. It only opened a crack so that I could breathe, so that I could try to move forward with my life, with our son, with our story, even if it had changed forever. From that day on, I began to understand that love can be stronger than pain, and that forgiving is not forgetting, but choosing not to let resentment dominate you. I needed to take care of that baby, who was my new reason to carry on, even though the man I loved had destroyed everything. I spent sleepless nights thinking about what lay ahead. How could I trust again? How could I rebuild something that seemed impossible? But I also thought about the baby, about his future, and I knew I couldn't give up. What about you? Have you ever experienced a betrayal that changed your life forever? How did you deal with forgiveness? Do you think you would be able to forgive even before cutting the umbilical cord? I would really like to hear your opinion. Comment here, like if this story touched you, and subscribe to follow this journey until the end. And until that day, I thought I knew exactly who I was, who my family was, and where my life would take me. But the betrayal I discovered during my birth turned everything upside down. I didn't know how to look at the man I loved, nor how to look at that child who was the fruit of a lie. In the days that followed, the pain turned into a storm that swallowed me up inside. I felt lost, betrayed, and at the same time trapped in a love that I didn't know still existed. My husband couldn't look me in the eye, and the silence between us was heavier than any words. I cried in secret, but when I looked at my son, I felt a love so strong that it hurt. He wasn't to blame. He had nothing to do with the lie his father told me. And it was for him that I needed to be strong, for him that I needed to carry on. But how do you forgive something like that? How do you give a chance to someone who destroyed you when you were most vulnerable? There were nights of anguish, of screams stuck in your throat, of a pain that seemed to never end. I wondered if one day I would be able to look at him without feeling angry. In the midst of all this, one thing became clear. Forgiveness was not for him, but for me. I needed to free myself from that hatred that consumed me, from that resentment that only hurt me. Forgiveness was my only way to be able to breathe again. But forgiveness didn't come easily. I had to go through an intense internal battle, fighting against my own feelings, against the hurt, against the desire to give up. Many times I thought about leaving everything behind, leaving that house, that life that seemed like a nightmare. And then something happened that changed everything. I saw my husband cry, not out of immediate regret, but out of deep sorrow, an acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. He asked for forgiveness, not only for me, but for the child who had just been born. It was a painful and, at the same time, revealing moment. I didn't promise it would be easy. I didn't promise I would forget, but I decided to try, for our family, for our son, and for myself. That forgiveness, given before the umbilical cord, was the first step in a long journey of reconstruction, of healing. The days after that forgiveness were a roller coaster ride I never imagined I would experience. Inside, I still felt like a bomb, about to explode, but I had to control my fury so that our son wouldn't feel the weight of my pain. Motherhood is beautiful, but at that moment for me, it was a minefield of emotions. Every smile my baby gave me was a challenge for me to keep hope alive. My husband seemed like a stranger trying to reclaim a territory he himself had devastated. With every step he took, I felt doubt eating away at me. Did he deserve the chance? Could the forgiveness I gave him at birth be my greatest weakness? Sometimes I wanted to scream to the world that he had betrayed me, that the baby I held in my arms was not just the fruit of our love, but of a betrayal that cut my soul in half. I asked myself incessantly, how could a woman endure such pain and still choose to forgive? I felt judged by those who did not understand the turmoil I was going through. Friends distanced themselves, family questioned my decision, and I found myself alone in a turbulent sea of feelings. But deep down, I was certain that held me together. Forgiving was not for him. It was for me, for my peace, so that I would not let hatred destroy what could still be saved. At the same time, my love for my son grew with each passing moment, and I promised myself that he would never carry the burden of the choice I had made. He would be loved, protected, and never judged for the origin of that painful story. It was the only light in that dark scenario. But how do I rebuild my trust? How do I look at him and believe again? The nights were long and full of silence. My heart was heavy. My mind was full of doubts. It was in this space that I began to seek answers within myself. Therapy, conversations with a few people, and most importantly, the courage to look in the mirror every day and ask myself, who do I want to be after all this? There were times when I wanted to give up, when sadness almost swallowed me whole, but I couldn't. I couldn't let the past define my son's future, my future. There was a daily struggle between the desire to erase that memory and the will to build something new, even if it left scars. Have you ever faced a situation where forgiving seemed impossible? How did you find the strength to carry on? Months passed, and little by little I learned to breathe without the knot in my chest that the betrayal had left. The wound still existed, open somewhere inside me, but it no longer hurt unbearably. What I did during childbirth, when I forgave, before even cutting the umbilical cord, was a decision that shocked many people. and I understand why. Who forgives something so deep and so cruel? I, Larissa, decided that the love for my son would be greater than my hurt. But the question that remained for me, and for those who follow this story, is, does forgiving mean forgetting? Does it mean accepting betrayal as something normal, or something that I should endure forever? I discovered that it wasn't. Forgiving isn't synonymous with erasing the past or turning your back on pain. Forgiving was my way of liberation, so that my soul wouldn't be trapped in suffering forever. It was the first step towards rebuilding my life, but it wasn't the last. The betrayal was a shock that required radical changes. I realized that I couldn't continue in that relationship the way it was. Not for the baby, not for me. I demanded respect, transparency, and most importantly, a real commitment to rebuilding. If he couldn't give me that, I preferred to move on alone, but happily. What happened next? Our marriage entered a period of painful reconstruction, full of ups and downs. Confidence didn't come back overnight, and I often thought about giving up. But the baby, my son, became the bond that forced us to try. He needed a home, parents who loved each other even if they had scars. And I needed to forgive myself for not being perfect, for having made a decision that many judge, but which, for me, was the only one possible at that moment. Still, I can't deny that the world's judgment hurts. I heard things that no one should hear. I felt disapproving looks. I received advice that hurt me more than it helped. People who should have been on my side pointed their fingers at me, as if I were to blame for choosing to forgive. But the truth is that forgiveness is not for the weak, nor for the naive. Forgiveness is for the brave who face their own ghosts in order to live in peace. Today, I look back and see that that night, when I discovered the betrayal during childbirth, was the lowest point, but also the beginning of a new Larissa, a woman who learned to love herself even when it seemed impossible, who understood that forgiveness can save not only others, but mainly herself. And you, what would you do if you were in my place? Could you forgive before cutting the cord? Or would I keep the pain in my chest forever? I really want to know your opinion. Leave your comment, like, and share this story that shows that real life is not perfect, but is full of choices that define who we are. And subscribe to continue following true stories that touch the heart and challenge the mind.